Now, Java exceptions can be thrown and they can be caught, and the three keywords are try, catch, and finally. So here's a code sample of that. Notice at line 44, I print out the current time. And what I want to do is delay for 1 second. So at line 46, java.lang thread.sleep, I'm going to the package java.lang. There's a class called thread, and the class called thread has a method called sleep, where you give it the milliseconds that you want to sleep. So here I'm sleeping for the milliseconds, in this case 1,000 milliseconds. However, to do this, you have to put it inside a try and provide a catch at line 48. Why is that? Because while you're sleeping, it could be interrupted. And if it was interrupted, you would get the java.lang.interrupted exception. So you'd get that particular exception. And then you would, in our case, we just print out that we got it. Also, just for the sake of demonstration, notice I showed a finally, and the finally always executes. Even if you have an exception or even if you don't have an exception, you will always execute finally. And that's totally optional. You don't even have to put that there, but I wanted to show it for this particular example. And then at line 54, we print out the current milliseconds again. So really what this code does is demonstrate how you can sleep for a second using thread.sleep, but more importantly, it shows using the try and the catch for handling exceptions within the Java language. All right, in addition to throwing exceptions, your Java code can make decisions. It can use an if, it can use an if-else, and it can use a switch. So let's first look at the if statement. Notice at line 17, java.util.random. So here's a new class, java.util.random, and I'm creating a new util.random, basically a random number generator. And at line 18, notice random next int will get the next integer value. And so that gives us a num1, and at line 19, I print that out. So we see what num1 is. Also at line 21, we do random.nextInt again, and we get a second integer. And at line 24, we check. We say if num1 is greater than num2, and we would print out if it is greater. So that's a good example of using a single if statement. You can also use an if-else. So here, the same thing, we generate a random number for num1 and num2. At line 24, we do the if statement just like we did before, but at line 27, we have an else. So here we have else if num1 is less than num2. So the first check, we check is num1 greater than num2. The second else, we say, or when we say else, we're checking if num1 is less than num2. The final else at line 30, if it's not greater than, if it's not less than, then it must be equal. And so you can run that, and depending on the random number generated, you'll see the value from that. So notice this is a good way to generate a random number and also understand the difference between else or if-else, and if-else, if-else. Finally, when you're making decisions, you can use a switch statement. Here in this case, at line 34, we're switching on that integer number, that num1. And if we have at line 35 case 0, then we print out that it was a 0, and then we break. At line 17 says break out of this switch statement. So we're done. In a similar manner, at line 38, if we have case 1, that is if num1 had the value of 1, we display that, and then we break out of that. The default at line 41 is for everything else, we would take the default condition. Your Java code can also create loops, and there are 3 ways we can do this. There's the for, the while, and the do while. So let's start with the for. This is probably one of the most frequently used ones. It's good when you know the number of times you want to go through something. So in this case, for I equals 0, I less than 3. So we know we want to go through it 0, 1, and 2. And if you know that count, then the for loop is a good one to use because you know how many times, and the for loop can do it that many times. In this case, at line 46, we're just displaying the value of the integer. You can also do a while. So the while statement is you'll check the condition at the beginning of the loop. So this is good if you're not sure how many times you're going to do it, number one. And in fact, you might not do it at all. Since the check is at the beginning of the loop, you could do the check and find out that you don't need to execute this loop at all. Or you will execute the loop, but you're not sure how many times, but you'll check at each time at the top. So in this case, at line 49, we have a count setting it to 0. At line 50, as long as count is less than 3. So as long as count is less than 3, we'll come in here, we'll print out the count, we'll increment the count at line 52, and then just keep doing this over and over. Now, clearly this is doing actually the exact same steps that the previous for loop did. I'm showing that same for loop here implemented with a while loop. The last one for looping is the do while. This one is when you always know you want to do it at least once. And the reason you always know you want to do it at least once, the do will always do the first set of steps, and it doesn't check as to whether it needs to do it again until you're at the end of the loop. So here the do while at line 59, we're saying while the count is less than 3. So as long as that condition is true, we'll continue to do the do. So again, the important thing of this one is if you know you're going to do the loop at least once, and maybe more, depending on that condition down at the bottom. And this is an end of our Java language tour. As you look back over this, make sure you can enter and run all the code and understand all the concepts. And also remember, you can watch the video multiple times. You can speed it up, slow it down as needed to make sure you understand all the topics. I'm Norman McIntyre. Thanks as always for watching.